Welcome to the America 250 PA Start Here, America Did podcast, telling the unique stories that make up the diverse fabric of Pennsylvania.
Welcome back to another episode of the America 250 PA podcast. I'm your host, Sydney Harris, and today we continue honoring Women's History Month by celebrating two trailblazing Pennsylvania women who revolutionized investigative journalism, Ida Tarbell and Nellie Bly. From exposing the corrupt business practices of Standard Oil to going undercover in an asylum to expose inhumane conditions, these women were fearless in their pursuit of truth. And their impact? It still shapes journalism today. This episode features two segments. First, we'll be joined by Jennifer Burden, Heritage Program Manager with the Oil Region Alliance, who will share how the Ida Tarbell house preserves her history and how growing up in Pennsylvania's oil region shaped her groundbreaking career. Then we'll head to Apollo, Pennsylvania, where we'll talk with Alan Morgan and Bill Miller of the Apollo Area Historical Society about the unstoppable Nellie Bly, her Pennsylvania roots, and her fearless approach to journalism that changed the industry forever. So settle in and get ready to uncover the incredible legacies of Ida Tarbell and Nellie Bly, two Pennsylvania women who refused to stay silent and made history. Jennifer, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to talk about Ida.
So before we begin, I would love to hear more about you and the Oil Region Alliance. Could you tell us a little bit more about you and your organization?
My name is Jennifer Burden, and I am the Heritage Program Manager for the Oil Region Alliance. My undergraduate degree is in history, and I have a master's degree in historic preservation. I have been working for the Oil Region Alliance for now just over 7 years. And the Oil Region Alliance is an umbrella nonprofit organization. We cover a lot of different things, but the part that I'm specifically involved with is that the oil region is a national as well as state heritage area. We cover all of Venango County and the southeast portion of Crawford County in the northwest part of the state. And as you may assume by our name, we are focused on oil history in Pennsylvania, more specifically the birthplace of the modern petroleum industry that happened just outside of Titusville in Venango County. And so we celebrate all that the industry brought to our area, and not just oil specifically, but the people, the places, and the movements that happened out of that as well.
And part of the Oil Region Alliance is the Ida Tarbell house. Can you tell me about this house? What is your mission, and how does it help preserve Ida Tarbell's legacy?
So the house, it's her childhood home. And long story short of it, it was built by her father with materials from the Bonta House Hotel in Pit Hole. And Pit Hole is a place, it's an awful name, but it is a place in Venango County that was the quintessential boom and bust town in the oil region. And at one point, it was the third busiest post office in Pennsylvania, right behind Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, which is so unreal to think about, this little tiny place in Venango County. But it boomed and it busted hard. There was a lot of buildings that were thrown up to house workers and other people coming through to take advantage of the oil industry in that town. But when it busted, everyone left and all these buildings remained. And Franklin Tarbell, Ida's father, was able to purchase one of those buildings, the Bonta House, move the pieces that he needed to Titusville to build the house that is now known as the Tarbell House. And it served as the Tarbell family home from 1870 to about 1917. After Ida's mother passed, she and her siblings decided to sell the house. And that's when it left Tarbell ownership. And then between that date and about 2007, went through the hands of a number of different owners. It saw a lot of changes, physical changes to the house. And by the time that the Oil Region Alliance purchased it in 2007, if Ida walked past the house, I highly doubt she would have recognized it as her childhood home. The roof line was changed, the porch was changed. Part of the house itself was gone. That was due to a fire that happened in the 1920s. And when that wing burned, it was taken down and not rebuilt. We did not rebuild the wing. I'm just put that out there. But it was in sad shape. And the Oil Region Alliance, the staff, our board members, our committee members, and the community as a whole knew that that house was important. There's a historic marker outside of it, recognizing that it was Ida's childhood home. So they purchased the house with the intent to restore it to as closely as possible to when the Tarbells would have owned the home. So now, if Ida were to walk past the house, she probably would recognize it as her home, even though it is a slightly smaller building right now. We did not have any interior photos of the house, so that's kind of a guess of to what those rooms would have looked like. But the exterior, we have a good amount of photo documentation of what it looked like. So that's what we use to restore the house to about a 1890s appearance. The interior, there's some rooms where we knew what they were just by looking at them, the front parlor, the dining room, the kitchen, obviously. But we've decorated them in a, like I said, 1890s sort of motif. And that date gives us a couple good things to work with. At that time, you could be wallpapering your house, or you could be painting in these newly available bright colors. Also, about that time, they would have had the option of having either electric lighting or gas lighting. And we illustrate this on the first floor with all of our light fixtures have an upward facing and a downward facing light fixture, and that indicates electric and gas lighting. We decorate those front rooms as closely as possible to what could have been there. We don't have anything from the Tarbells themselves, considering that it was about a 90-year difference from when they left to when we acquired the building. We have photos of the family, including a few of the family sitting outside on the porch, so having them specifically at the house. Restoring that house brought new life to the story of Ida. She also had a farmhouse in Connecticut that is still around, but it's in private hands. So in that farmhouse, that came later in life because of the money that she made as a journalist. But this house best illustrates her history, living in the oil boom. Her father came specifically to work in the industry, and she was able to see that with her own eyes and live those experiences. Even after she left for college, she continued to return to this house through her adulthood. And we were then able to take this house and give tours, not only as a very cute Victorian house, but also how this house and this community impacted Ida and made her the woman that she became.
Yeah, I want to talk about that a little bit. Ida grew up in Pennsylvania's oil region, and I do want to learn more about how this environment shaped her perspective and later her career as a journalist.
Her father came down from Erie County. She actually wasn't born too far away from the oil boom area. She was born in 1857, and Edwin Drake successfully drilled oil in August of 1859. And that led her father to come down, investigate, and he quickly determined that he could stake a career in the area, and then brought the rest of his family down to settle in what is now Brownsville, which is just north of Oil City. It's between Oil City and Titusville, but closer to Oil City. That was a boom town, very rough and tumble. Ida got to see a lot of things. I think she saw a lot of things that her mother really didn't want her to see and experience. Just lots of rough and tumble, men working in and out. Brownsville, like I said, was a boom town, so there wasn't that infrastructure of an established community. And that's why they moved to Titusville, because Titusville already had schools and churches and roads, because that had been established as a community before the oil boom. But she got to witness things just on her own. She was always a curious child, and she would wander off on her own to find what she was interested in. And her father was in the oil business when they moved. He was first building barrels to hold oil, so he was a cooper. And then he could see that wooden barrels were not going to be the future of moving oil. They're very leaky, they crack easily. And so we knew that wood was out, metal was coming in. So he switched and became an independent producer. So she got to see multiple facets of the industry just by being with her father. And what she saw and what she experienced let her write the history of Standard Oil. Anyone could have written that book, but not in the way she did because of her early experiences and exposure to what was happening. And her father and then later her brother worked in the industry as independent producers. And that was a whole nother side of it. They never sold out to Standard Oil like many others did. So she was able to take all those experiences and shape them into into what was the serial from 1902 to 1904 and then compiled into the book. So without having lived it for as long as she did and in the ways that she did, that book would have been it would have turned out differently than if she was the one writing it.
I'd like to talk more about the history of the Standard Oil Company. This exposed one of the most powerful monopolies in history. What led her to take on such a massive story, and what were the risks involved?
She really didn't want to take it on. Her boss, S.S. McClure, who was the owner of McClure's magazine, who she was working for, said to her, "I'd like you to do this." And she was hesitant. She spoke to her father about it, and he was hesitant as well. He understood that John D. Rockefeller was a very powerful man and didn't know how this could affect her personally as well as professionally. And he said, maybe you shouldn't do this. But she thought it over and decided to move ahead. And the funny thing is, she got a lot of her information about the company from a contact named Henry Rogers. And he was also from the region, and she had known him before. I think if that earlier history between them hadn't existed, she wouldn't have been able to get to interview him. Also on his end, because she was a woman, and because maybe he had known her before, he opened up more because he didn't think that this was going to go anywhere. So we know that he told her more than he would have told any other journalist. If it were any other journalist, he may not have even spoken to them, but he spoke to her. So unfortunately or fortunately, because he didn't take her as seriously, he opened up to her. And that's how she was able to get a lot of information about the company. She never met John D. Rockefeller. She never spoke to him. So that was her main source. And that's what made the book as successful as it was.
What were some of the long-term effects of Ida Tarbell's work on journalism? Her reporting directly contributed to the breaking up of Standard Oil. So what were these effects? What did that look like?
John D. Rockefeller and his executives were making deals with the railroads, and they were paying less to move oil via the railroads, which is how you would have done it at the time, because that's going to be the most efficient and quick way to get places. And some of the times he just bought the railroad, and so then he wasn't paying at all to move oil. And then those independent oil producers like Franklin Tarbell didn't get those same rights. So it became cost prohibitive for them to ship. And then if they were trying to ship on a rail line that was owned by Rockefeller, well, they could easily have been turned down. And so they were really stuck. And that was part of the reason that the monopoly came to light and was eventually broken up. Standard Oil was broken up into 30-some businesses. And so you get things like Standard Oil of New Jersey, Standard Oil of New York. Those become separate companies. But it actually made Rockefeller more money by having these separate companies than under one umbrella. So it's kind of a shame that all this happened, and Rockefeller not only wasn't financially affected by it in a bad way, he was kind of rewarded in a way, which is not what anyone was going for that was fighting Standard Oil. But it shed more light on the industry. And Ida was working at a time when many investigative journalists were pulling back the curtain, if you will, on certain industries. So you have Upton St. Clair writing The Jungle that really exposed the meatpacking industry in Chicago, the horrible things that were happening there. So it was part of a movement, and she was one piece of that movement at the time, that early 20th century.
In this industry, Tarbell was one of the few women in this predominantly male-dominated field. Do you know what challenges she faced as a female journalist in the early 1900s, and how did she navigate them?
Well, as I mentioned, it actually worked in her favor for History of Standard Oil because she wasn't taken as seriously and then was able to get more information than if one of her male colleagues was in the same position. Reading about her working at McClure's magazine, Sam McClure, SS McClure, who owned the magazine, was one of those types of people who was constantly in motion and constantly changing new ideas or just new things that fascinated him. So it was very hard to pin down, and that really frustrated probably all of his staff, definitely most of the staff, if not all. And Ida really became, I call her sort of the mother hen. I don't know if that's the right word for, or the right phrase for that, but she kept the staff together. When SS McClure was out chasing whatever and the staff was getting frustrated, she would remind them that McClure, really had some good ideas, and that's why they're here, and don't worry, we'll figure this out. And so she kept them together for a while. I don't see that coming from potentially a male colleague of hers, that was just part of her intuition to keep that going. There were a few other female journalists at the time, and no, they weren't always taken as seriously, or certainly not paid as much as their male counterparts, or invited to certain things. This is the era of social halls that women were often not welcome. So that may have been, today we'd call it networking and meeting other people and chasing down stories. Well, those opportunities weren't available to her and the few other female journalists at the time.
And as we reflect on Women's History Month, what is one key lesson or takeaway you hope people gain from Ida Tarbell's story?
One thing that I really like about her story is not just with the history of Standard Oil, that she was hesitant to take it on, but her first assignment with McClure's magazine, she was told to write a biography of President Lincoln, and this would have been the 1890s. So Lincoln had only died about 30 years previously, and so many people had already written about him. And she was hesitant to take it because she felt, what am I going to bring? What new thought, what new idea is she going to bring? Because everyone had done this. But she took that assignment and did make it her own and brought a new, more personal spin about the life of Abraham Lincoln. And just like History of Standard Oil, she was able to take that, and because of her experience, make it her own. So I think a good takeaway is, don't be afraid if you're given something or asked to do something and it seems something that you don't want to get involved with, or afraid that you can't do it justice. Give it a shot. I mean, she did, and she was able to make not only a whole career out of it, but a career that really wouldn't have been open to her at the time. So don't be afraid to take the chance.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Jennifer. It was really wonderful speaking to you and learning more about Ida Tarbell. For individuals interested in learning more or being a part of your organization, how could they do so?
You can go to our website, which is oilregion.org. Specifically for the Tarbell House, the best way to find out what's going on is to follow the Tarbell House on Facebook. We have student-led Victorian teas in the fall and the spring, and we have 3 coming up this spring in March, April, and May. Plus, we have other events at the house. And we try to have the house open in the summer for public tours. But if you're ever in the Titusville area, feel free to reach out to the Oil Region Alliance. Even if we're not having a tour, we are always open to having a staff member give you a tour, whether it's a group of 3 or a group of 30. We don't mind. We love bringing people in and showing them the house and telling the story.
Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Thank you, Sydney. Appreciate it.
Now we shift our focus to another Pennsylvania powerhouse of journalism, Nellie Bly. I'm thrilled to welcome Alan Morgan and Bill Miller from the Apollo Area Historical Society. Thank you so much for being here, guys.
Thank you for having us.
So before we dive into Nellie Bly's story, I'd love to learn more about the Apollo Area Historical Society. What is your mission and what goals do you have for the Apollo area?
Well, the Apollo Area Historical Society started in 1970. There was an old log cabin in Apollo. It's rumored to be the oldest building in town. Apollo was founded in 1816, but we know the cabin is not from that year, but very close. And a lady lived in it until 1965, and then it was empty for 5 years after she died. And her family didn't want the cabin being torn down, so the Historical Society formed to save the log cabin and restore it and, put it back to the way it was years ago. She lived there. She had electric into the cabin, but she did not have any water. She used a spring out back, and she cooked on a wood burner. Kind of was living a little bit primitive, but she did have modern conveniences. So when the Historical Society got it in 1971, they restored it and put it back. We advertise it as pre-Civil War era, and it's furnished with, typical furniture of the time. We have a spring house out back. Just last year, we had a old-fashioned outhouse rebuilt. It's not functional because we have sewage in Apollo, so we can't use it, but just did it more for the looks. But we also have a museum. It's in the old Women's Christian Temperance Union building on North 2nd Street in Apollo. It was home to the Apollo Memorial Library till 1965 when they built a new library. Women's Christian Temperance Union was obviously involved in temperance. And one of the things that they also focused on was education. So there was no library in Apollo at the time. 1909, the building was built and they provided space for the library. So that's our museum today now. It's a 2-story building. It's not real big. We're running out of room, but we have, all kinds of artifacts on display about Apollo, and, anything to do with Apollo is in there.
And what is Nellie Bly's connection to Apollo? What was her life like growing up in this region of Pennsylvania?
Well, she was born in nearby Cochran's Mills, which I believe is about 10, 12 miles away from Apollo, I think, something like that. Her father was from Apollo, Judge Cochran. He became an associate judge for Armstrong County, which today is like our magistrates. And they lived in Cochran's Mills. He had a couple mills there. They renamed the town after him because he did so much for it. When he became the magistrate or the associate judge, he moved to Apollo, moved the family to Apollo because this was his district. He built a big house in Apollo. Shortly after he built it, he died and didn't have a will. And his second wife, who is Nellie's mother, they lived there for a while until they lost the house. The judge's first wife's children went to court to get the property. And so the second wife, Mary Jane Cochran, she lost the house, and her 5 kids moved down around the corner to another street. So she lived here till she was like about 16 years old. She went to school here. She went to church here. She got her upbringing here, her values and everything. And then they moved to Pittsburgh when she was 16 because her mother had remarried. Can't remember his first name now. His last name was Ford. He was abusive to her and threatened to kill her mother. And so Mary Jane just finally got a divorce. Nellie Bly went to court, testified against them, which was unheard of for children in them days. And after that all happened, they moved to Pittsburgh just to get away from everything. So she lived here for about 10 years, but she had her, her upbringing here.
And today we're here to talk about Nellie's groundbreaking impact on investigative journalism. While she undoubtedly influenced women in journalism, she also changed the field really as a whole. I'd love to explore some of her most famous work. One of her most renowned pieces was her undercover investigation at Blackwell's Island. Can you tell us about the significance of that expose and the changes it helped bring about?
Well, when she was in Pittsburgh, she started working for the paper down there, and they wanted her to just do like women's articles and cooking and gardening and all those types of things. And Nellie wasn't interested in that. She wanted something bigger and something more, important. She moved to New York and worked for the paper up there, and then disguised herself. They admitted her to the hospital, and she was in there, and she observed how they were treating the people and the inmates, and how they, they were just so cruel to them and bathing them in cold water. And, the food was terrible, and there were rats and things running around through the cells. And she exposed all of that stuff. They had trouble getting her out. They didn't believe that she was not crazy. The newspaper finally stepped in and convinced them at the hospital that she was there, on a mission. After she got out there, and she reported on all this stuff, how the patients were treated, brought a lot of reforms to the whole system, just not just in New York, but the whole way across the country. People really found out how, people with mental problems were being treated so badly, and really changed the future of all that.
And another one of her incredible achievements was her race to travel around the world in 72 days. What inspired that journey, and what challenges did she face along the way?
She said that she came up with the idea one time. She was laying in bed, and she thought she wished she could be on the other side of the world. So she approached the paper, I guess, and they originally, the guy the editor of the paper, he didn't want to let her do it because he didn't think that she could do it because she was a woman. But she convinced them. Then they had many delays throughout Asia. They lost 15 days time with all the delays there. And I guess one of the most important things was the cultural differences with the languages and things of all the different countries that she had to travel through. She also faced weather issues, being in the Victorian era, where, again, women weren't supposed to do those kind of things. They were supposed to stay home and entertain and have children and take care of the house. And here she was out being a radical, I guess, trying to do something that nobody ever did before.
And how do you think Nellie Bly paved the way for journalism today?
The main thing would be not only just journalism, but everything that Nellie Bly did back in that time. Women didn't do any of those things. I mean, that just was something that was unheard of, especially journalism. And she kind of broke the barrier, I guess, opened that up to women. Investigative journalism was kind of started with her, and, the different social things that she attacked through her writings and reporting and things, and just opened up a lot of things that, women didn't have the opportunity to do before that. Today's world, I mean, what she did, women do those things today all the time. Nobody thinks twice about it. But back then, women didn't do that. They just stayed home. And she just, changed that forever.
And what is one thing you hope people take away from Nellie Bly's story?
Anybody can do anything. I mean, I guess she just never, like her, she really didn't know the meaning of the word no. She, that just made her that much more willing to fight for what she believed in. If somebody told her she couldn't do it, then she did it anyway. So I guess that's, the underlying thing there. I guess not just with women today, but anybody. I mean, you just can't let people tell you that you can't do something. If you really want to do it, and you work hard and fight hard for it, I guess you can.
Well, thank you so much. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for being here and helping us learn more about Nellie Bly.
Thank you for having us and getting to tell a little bit more about Nellie Bly.
What an amazing look at two fearless women who shaped their industry, challenged expectations, and used journalism to expose injustice. Their work not only transformed their time, but also propelled the future of investigative reporting. Ida Tarbell and Nellie Bly remind us that truth matters and that investigative journalism remains a powerful force for change. And once again, Pennsylvania played a key role in shaping some of the most influential figures in American history. As we continue celebrating Women's History Month, let's carry forward the lessons they left us. Ask important questions, refuse to accept you can't, and never back down from pursuing your passion. A huge thank you to Jennifer Burden, Alan Morgan, and Bill Miller for joining us today. And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a comment, and share it with Pennsylvania enthusiasts. And as always, stay PA proud.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cassandra Coleman, Executive Director of America 250 PA. Thank you so much for listening to today's podcast. We encourage you to learn more about America 250 PA and send us your podcast ideas at america250pa.org.
This has been the America 250 PA Start Here, America Did podcast, produced by Commonwealth Media Services. Stay tuned for more epic Pennsylvania stories at america250pa.org.